A black man walked into a bank to check on his account and walked out humiliated, dismissed, and escorted by security for no other reason than daring to stand in the wrong line with the wrong skin color. The clerk laughed at his balance. The manager looked past him like air, and a woman who arrived after him was offered a drink, a smile, and a private office. No raised voices, no broken laws, just the quiet precision of modern discrimination, delivered with professional courtesy. But what no one knew that day, what no one even thought to ask, was who they had just humiliated. He didn't argue, didn't protest, didn't even raise his voice. He simply walked out and set something in motion that would shake the entire financial world from the inside out. You won't believe what happens when power walks in quietly and lets injustice speak first. If you've ever witnessed moments like this, moments that look small on the surface but hide a storm underneath, this series is for you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, what you think should have happened differently, and if you've ever seen anything like this play out in real life. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The story begins here. But trust me, it doesn't end the way anyone in that bank expected. Terrell Harmon walked through the front doors of Mechlin Financial just before noon. The city heat clung to his collar, but his pace was steady and composed. He wore a navy sport coat over a white button-up shirt and slacks that had seen a few business trips too many. In his hand, a leather folder, worn but neatly kept. The lobby was a pristine expanse of marble floors, glass walls, and brushed aluminum counters. Ambient piano music floated from hidden speakers, giving the place a sterile sophistication. Terrell scanned the signs inside, nodded slightly to himself, and headed for the line labeled Premium Clients. He moved confidently, with the quiet poise of someone who understood where he stood. But the security guard, stationed near the velvet ropes, took one look at him and began to move. The man was tall, square-jawed, with a nameplate that simply read Marcus. His approach was neither rushed nor friendly, just decisive. "Excuse me, sir," he said, gesturing with his hand. "This line is reserved." Terrell calmly replied that he knew, and that he was here for a meeting regarding his account. He reached for his wallet to show identification, but Marcus didn't even glance at it. Instead, he motioned toward the general queue, longer, slower, positioned against the far wall like an afterthought. Terrell didn't argue. He simply stood his ground. Before anything else could be said, the glass doors opened behind them, and a woman entered, all confidence and gloss. Blonde, with oversized sunglasses and a tailored white suit, she breezed across the lobby without breaking stride. The receptionist's face lit up immediately. "Welcome back, Ms. Langford. Can I offer you a refreshment?" she chirped, already standing to greet her. A chilled bottle of water appeared almost magically, and within seconds, the woman was being escorted through a private hallway marked Executive Services. No ID, no waiting, no security check. Terrell turned back toward Marcus, who now looked slightly uncomfortable, but said nothing. Minutes passed. Terrell remained where he was, holding his place in the line while others behind him shifted impatiently. No one from the staff acknowledged him, not the receptionist, who returned to her desk with the same vacant chair, not the personal bankers gliding back and forth in suits and polished shoes. A man in a gray suit and Bluetooth headset entered next. He was ushered through after a brief handshake. Then an older couple arrived, the woman with a pearl necklace, the man with a newspaper under his arm. They were greeted by name, their arrival clearly anticipated. Terrell remained invisible. He shifted his weight subtly, more out of observation than impatience. Another client, this time a young woman carrying a laptop bag, was also fast-tracked past him. She offered him a hesitant glance, as if she noticed the imbalance, but said nothing. Nearby, a small boy tugged on his mother's arm and asked why the man in the blazer hadn't moved. The mother gave him a look that silenced further questions. Terrell exhaled slowly, watching it all. The receptionist made eye contact once, just once, but quickly turned her attention to something on her screen. The guard remained at his post, arms crossed. After 15 minutes of non-engagement, Marcus finally stepped forward again. "You'll need to visit our Jefferson branch," he said flatly. "Business account requests like yours can't be handled here." Terrell asked why that was. Marcus replied that it was policy, then looked away. No documents had been reviewed. No account numbers taken. No name confirmed. Just a conclusion, preloaded and ready. Terrell gave no visible reaction. Instead, he nodded once, quietly turned, and walked toward the exit. As he passed through the lobby, his phone buzzed once. He looked down briefly, tapped a single response, then slipped it away again. Before stepping outside, he turned for one final look at the room. He approached the reception desk again, calmly, and spoke with confidence. He asked to speak to a senior banker regarding account authorization and trust documentation. The woman behind the desk didn't lift her eyes immediately, her fingers tapping with soft clicks against the keyboard, eyes flicking between windows on the monitor. She asked for his full name, and when he gave it, she offered a vague smile and pointed him toward counter 3. Counter 3 sat at the far end of the main floor, slightly removed from the row of private glass offices where real decisions were made. Behind it stood Preston Mathers, a banker in his early 40s with hair combed so stiff it looked lacquered, a sharp Windsor knot that screamed aspiration, and a face that barely hid how much he despised being questioned. Terrell approached with steady steps. Preston, already glancing at his screen, asked for a name and account number. Terrell provided both. Preston began typing. He didn't greet him. He didn't smile. After a pause, Preston's brow furrowed. His eyes scanned the screen quickly, his lips parting slightly. He squinted at the data, leaned back, then exhaled. His sigh wasn't theatrical, but deliberate enough to be noticed. He looked at Terrell for the first time since the interaction began. "Is this everything?" he asked, as if something was missing or misrepresented. Terrell confirmed that it was. Preston leaned closer to the monitor, clicked into another tab, and chuckled softly under his breath. "That's odd," he murmured, not quietly. "Most people with less than $500 don't ask for trust structuring. That's generally for clients with assets to protect." Terrell didn't flinch. He simply responded with a calm nod, stating that his documentation was in order and that he was instructed to meet with a trust officer. Preston folded his arms, now visibly irritated. "We don't usually escalate these kinds of accounts to our trust division," he said, his voice raised just slightly enough for two people in the nearby line to turn their heads. "I think you may have misunderstood the service tier you're in. This is the private side of the branch, for high-value clients. We have community branches better suited for, basic needs." Terrell didn't argue. He simply asked if Preston was denying his request to speak with someone higher. Preston grinned tightly. "No, of course not," he replied, sarcasm threading every syllable. "But we don't bring in our trust officers for balance inquiries." The woman behind Terrell in line stepped aside and whispered something to her husband. A man 2 counters away, in a suit and tie, cast a look in Terrell's direction, then returned to his phone. Preston continued typing, but his motions were slower now, almost exaggerated, as if hoping Terrell would grow impatient and leave on his own. When Terrell asked again to proceed with the request, Preston leaned back in his chair. "This kind of work is reserved for people whose accounts reflect the volume required for asset management. I'm not sure you're quite in that bracket," he said. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He simply let the implication hang there, dry and sharp like a knife on a table. Terrell responded again, evenly. "Please connect me with someone who handles institutional structures," he said. Preston raised an eyebrow. "Institutional?" he repeated. Then he laughed. "Let me guess. You're starting a non-profit or something." His tone was light, but the ridicule inside it was unmistakable. "Or is this a self-made fund? Maybe a community project?" He emphasized the word community with a note of performative care. Someone near the back of the line shifted awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable. But Preston wasn't done. He tapped a few keys, then looked up again. "Sorry," he said flatly. "The system's not showing any activity worth processing. There's no way our officers will waste time reviewing this without a flagged account or invitation. If there's something else I can help you with, like setting up an online banking app or checking for an overdraft, I'd be happy to assist." Terrell didn't blink. He simply asked if the interaction was being documented. Preston hesitated, caught off guard. "We don't usually document inquiries," he replied. "But sure, I can add a note if that helps you sleep at night." There was silence between them for a beat too long. The mood at the counter thickened. The printer behind Preston hummed briefly and then stopped. Somewhere near the entrance, a child's laugh cut through the cold air of the room, but it faded quickly. Preston finally stood and gestured dismissively. "Let me go ask someone if they'll even look at this," he said, then walked off, shaking his head. Eventually, he didn't bother to make eye contact. Terrell calmly picked up the sheet, scanning it with steady eyes. It was a basic intake form, the kind used for walk-in clients without appointment or priority, a placeholder more than a process. Still seated, Preston reclined in his chair and offered a condescending shrug. "Look, I'm going to be honest with you. You're better off using the ATM outside or contacting customer service over the phone. These counters are meant for more complex issues. This line isn't really for small transactions or balance questions." He gestured dismissively toward the side entrance, where two machines stood humming beside a potted plant. "Quick, efficient. No wait," he added, as if advertising a shortcut to someone incapable of understanding systems. Terrell set the form down without writing anything. He asked again if his request to speak with a senior officer had been denied officially or if it was being deflected personally. That made Preston smile, but not kindly. "It's not being denied," he replied, "but it's certainly not being prioritized. We don't assign senior officers for minimal activity accounts. It's just not how we operate. We have protocols." His voice emphasized the last word as though invoking a sacred rule. At that moment, a young associate behind the teller line, who had been quietly organizing documents, glanced over. She was perhaps in her 20s, eyes sharp, clearly attentive. Her name tag read Alina. She watched for a moment longer than she should have, then stepped forward and approached Preston's desk, speaking low but firm. "Would you like me to call someone from the institutional team?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. "I think he mentioned asset management. That falls under Team 4's purview, right?" Preston didn't even turn to look at her. Instead, he raised one hand slowly and held it out, palm down, a signal that didn't require words. "Stop. Back off. Stay in your lane." Alina stood silently, absorbing the gesture. Then she nodded once and stepped back, her face neutral again, but her eyes heavy with conflict. Preston returned his gaze to Terrell, clearly enjoying the small performance of dismissal. "As I said," he repeated with exaggerated patience, "we'll contact you if anything develops. There's no urgency here." Then, with mock concern, he leaned in slightly. "Unless, of course, this is some kind of mistake. Did someone at another branch send you here under the impression you had an executive portfolio?" The bait was clear, but Terrell did not take it. Instead, he repeated the same request one final time, that someone from the institutional office be notified that a client had arrived regarding existing instruments. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply asked. Preston leaned back again, chuckling softly as if amused by the persistence. "You must be new to this environment," he said. "That's not how it works. You don't just walk into a place like this and expect an audience. It takes appointments, history, a track record. You don't get an elevator key just because you walked into the lobby." The metaphor hung in the air like smoke. A woman 2 desks away glanced over, frowned slightly, then returned to her computer. Terrell sat still. He did not shift in his chair. He did not blink. But the silence between them now pulsed with weight. Preston seemed momentarily unsure what to say next, so he reached for his coffee cup and took a slow sip, trying to appear composed, trying to reclaim the upper ground. "Listen," he added after a pause, "I'm just being real with you. This system isn't designed for optimism. It's designed for volume, performance, return. That's the lane we play in. If you don't fit those filters, then this building isn't really the place for you. It's nothing personal." But everything about his tone said otherwise. He smiled thinly, clearly expecting Terrell to finally get up and walk away. The wait, the dismissal, the public shame. It had all been orchestrated for this outcome, to reduce Terrell into just another man trying too hard to pretend he belonged. But Terrell didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't withdraw. He simply stared at Preston, absorbing the moment, capturing its every detail. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes turned. He opened his folder quietly, removed one document, and placed it neatly on the desk. It was a trust deed, clearly labeled, with names, dates, and references to consolidated holdings. Outside, the early light broke through the city towers, but the warmth did not touch his expression. He paused on the sidewalk, adjusted the strap of his leather folder, then turned slightly to glance at the building's reflective glass facade. His own figure stared back at him, calm, still, composed. Moments later, as the branch returned to its routine, Preston, still at his desk, stewed in confusion. Something about the last document Terrell had left unsettled him, though he refused to show it. That trust deed had been structured, labeled, and referenced in ways that didn't align with the picture he had formed. The name Terrell Harmon seemed familiar, but Preston couldn't place it. Instead of investigating further, he defaulted to control, picking up his phone and dialing internal security. His voice lowered but stayed pointed. "I want you to flag that gentleman. He's been disruptive, attempting to escalate over policy. I don't think he belongs here." The guard on duty was the same man from the day before, Marcus, a tall, silent presence who had watched the interactions but said nothing. Within minutes, Marcus moved through the lobby, stopping near the reception where Alina was sorting files. He asked about the incident, keeping his tone neutral. Alina hesitated, her fingers pausing mid-motion. She considered telling the truth, that the client had been polite, measured, and clearly misjudged, but the weight of Preston's authority still hung in the air. All she said was, "He left on his own." Marcus nodded, then crossed the floor and positioned himself near the entrance. Meanwhile, Preston drafted a memo, marked it internal, and attached vague language about client behavior. He made sure to include key phrases like possible disruption and inconsistent documentation. The report, while thin on substance, carried the weight of implication. As midday arrived, the branch filled again. Business professionals filtered through with leather briefcases. Retirees asked about CD rates. Young couples inquired about mortgage options. Yet the energy inside felt oddly different. Several employees had noticed the earlier exchange. Whispers traveled faster than facts, and by now, Terrell's presence had become a topic, though never by name, never by detail. Just a question hanging unspoken. Who was he, and why had he rattled the rhythm? Preston carried on as if unaffected, speaking with new clients, smiling just enough to appear engaged. But behind the mask, he remained fixated. He checked the security footage twice, requested a scrub of Terrell's account history, and even ran a shallow internet search. No red flags, no threats, just a name, a signature, and a silence that now felt like thunder in the background. Around 1:30 p.m., Terrell returned. He entered through the same door, carried the same folder, wore the same calm expression. But this time, Marcus stepped forward before he reached the queue. "Sir," the guard said, "I need to speak with you outside." Terrell paused. "Is there an issue?" he asked, voice even. Marcus replied, "We've had a report that you caused a disturbance during your last visit. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." The lobby, filled with murmurs and movement, slowed just slightly. A nearby couple paused mid-conversation. A man sitting at the consultation desk turned his head. A small child holding her mother's hand looked up, confused. Terrell didn't resist. He didn't argue. He simply asked again if there was a written policy violation or if this was a discretionary removal. Marcus's reply was simple. "You've been flagged. I don't have details." The atmosphere around them thickened. Alina stood frozen near the copy machine, her lips slightly parted, uncertain whether to speak. Her eyes flicked to Preston's desk, where he now sat watching like a spectator at a theater show he had designed himself. From his vantage point, he saw a scene unfolding exactly as he intended. A client labeled difficult, a protocol invoked, an example made. Terrell looked around. Not at the guards or the walls, but at the people, the onlookers, the clients, the tellers. None of them knew his name. None of them had spoken to him. But their stares now carried weight. Some were curious. Some were confused. Others wore quiet agreement, shaped not by facts, but by the comfort of narrative. "He must have done something," whispered a woman near the reception. "Maybe he threatened someone," said another under his breath. The child by the door tugged again on his mother's sleeve and asked, "Why are they making that man leave?" The mother offered no answer, only a small, uncertain shake of the head. Terrell turned to Marcus and said, "I understand. I'll step outside." He moved toward the door with grace, his steps measured and precise. Marcus followed behind, his frame a silent shield. As the doors opened and closed, the room exhaled. The tension thinned, but something remained unsettled. In the quiet that followed, Alina finally approached Preston's desk. "That report you filed," she said, her voice low. "It wasn't accurate." She was a senior investigative reporter with over 15 years of experience covering systemic injustice, covert discrimination, and institutional failures. She hadn't planned to document anything that day. Her visit to Mechlin had been routine, reviewing her parents' estate accounts, updating a trust portfolio, nothing more. But as soon as Terrell had entered the room for the second time, she'd noticed the immediate change in atmosphere. She was attuned to shifts in tone, to body language, to coded signals of dismissal. She had seen them in police stations, in corporate offices, in courtrooms that claimed to serve justice. Now she watched it play out again in a space that sold itself as inclusive and sophisticated. At first, she had simply taken mental notes. But when Marcus approached Terrell and began escorting him toward the exit, when no manager intervened, and when the man left without protest yet surrounded by judgment, she pulled her phone from the inside pocket of her blazer and hit record. She didn't hold it up. She didn't announce anything. She kept it angled low in her lap, her expression unchanged, her gaze scanning the room while the camera lens quietly captured the scene. Every detail mattered. The way Preston had stared with a smirk as Marcus did the work for him. The way the receptionists averted their eyes. The way not a single person, staff or client, stepped forward to ask what had actually happened. More importantly, she captured the words. Marcus's explanation. Preston's earlier comment about escalation and disruption. The low, nervous whispers that followed the incident. And the most haunting of all, the child's voice asking a question no adult wanted to answer. As the doors shut behind Terrell and the lobby began to breathe again, Marissa ended the recording. She didn't leave right away. She remained seated, asked to speak with her assigned banker, and followed through with her original appointment like any other client. She smiled politely, signed her documents, and thanked the assistant for their time. But once back in her car, parked 2 blocks away in a reserved garage, she connected her phone to the car's Wi-Fi, opened a secure messaging app, and uploaded the entire clip. Her message was short, directed to her editor at the Sentinel, a national news outlet known for its deep investigative work. It read, "Just witnessed blatant racial profiling and procedural manipulation at Mechlin Financial Central Branch. Captured everything on video. Client was removed without cause. Staff cooperated in silent complicity. One executive-level banker engineered the scene. Based on what I heard, the man flagged might be someone significant. Sending footage now. This could blow open their entire DI program. Let's discuss how we package this. Feels like something big is hiding beneath this." She pressed send. Then she started the car. Back at the newsroom, her editor, a man named Clyde Freeman, read the message with raised eyebrows and immediately flagged it for priority review. Within 20 minutes, the footage was downloaded, time-stamped, and encrypted. It was then quietly sent to legal for early review. Clyde didn't respond to Marissa immediately. He needed to verify. He needed to scan policy manuals, review the firm's diversity pledges, and check for any known complaints previously filed against the branch. Meanwhile, Marissa drove home but couldn't shake what she had seen. The man hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't resisted. Yet everything about the bank's response had been rehearsed, mechanical, and most dangerously casual. It was the ease of exclusion that unsettled her most. She replayed the recording later that night, pausing at key moments. Preston's voice oozing with polite insult. Marcus citing a report without ever offering details. The hush that fell over the room. And finally, the collective indifference, as one man was quietly removed while the institution turned back to business. Marissa started typing that night, not the article, but a rough outline. She titled the document "The Polished Curtain: Racism Behind the Glass Walls." She outlined the timeline, the personnel involved, the systemic implications, and the questions the public would want answered. How many others had been flagged? How often was internal discretion used to selectively exclude? What internal policies allowed such decisions without oversight? And perhaps most importantly, who exactly was Terrell Harmon? She began digging. A name that plain wouldn't normally ring alarms, but her instincts told her something was off. She searched corporate databases, scanned old press mentions, and combed through business filings. There were too many Harmon entities to isolate a clear hit, but two details kept resurfacing: multiple LLCs in Delaware tied to a silent trust, and a closed investment fund linked to institutional real estate acquisitions. No public photo, no direct social media presence, but patterns whispered, and Marissa listened well. While she worked through the digital traces, her editor finally called. Preston sat at his desk, sipping burnt coffee from a monogrammed mug that said Senior Financial Advisor, flipping through low-priority emails with the indifference of a man who believed consequences never belonged to him. His shift began as usual: some basic account closures, a wealth review consultation with an elderly couple, and an internal memo about reinforcing the tone of professionalism at all customer touchpoints. Irony had no place in his mind. Meanwhile, Alina, already uneasy from the events of the prior day, had found the courage to escalate her concerns. Quietly and respectfully, she approached the assistant branch manager, a middle-aged man named Harold Beckman with thinning gray hair, a sharp tie knot, and the permanent expression of someone who valued order above inquiry. She summarized what had happened: how a client was flagged without cause, how no one truly confirmed any behavior, and how the removal had clearly been engineered. Harold listened, nodding with eyes that didn't blink much. When she finished, he sighed, looked past her, and replied with a tone that was meant to end discussion, not invite it. "Alina, thank you for your diligence, but these matters are better left in the hands of senior staff. If Preston felt the client was being disruptive, we have to support that judgment. Let's not overinflate what was probably a misunderstanding. We deal with higher volume every day than most branches see in a week. We can't lose focus." His voice was even, clipped, and final. She didn't protest. She simply nodded and returned to her desk, more disillusioned than before. What Harold failed to mention, or perhaps refused to believe, was that he had already received an email that morning. A courtesy warning from the company's internal compliance department. It was vague but concerning. A journalist had reached out to corporate communications requesting a comment on a recent customer rejection from a major urban branch. The name Terrell Harmon was included. The location matched. Harold read it, frowned slightly, and did nothing. He hadn't recognized the name, and his instinct told him it was likely just an angry customer trying to make noise. As he told another manager over lunch, "This'll blow over. We've seen these types before. They want attention. If we stay professional, it disappears." His confidence was that of a man who believed proximity to power insulated him from accountability. At that same moment, Preston received a separate message marked as internal: potential media inquiry. Do not discuss yesterday's incident. Forward any questions to legal. He read it, then deleted it. His arrogance remained untouched. After all, what could they really say? There was no footage, no formal complaint filed inside the bank. And as far as he knew, no one outside had seen what happened. He had kept things quiet. He had played the game well. What Preston didn't know was that just blocks away, Marissa had already scheduled an interview with a legal analyst and secured commentary from two other clients who had experienced eerily similar treatment at different Mecklen branches over the past 6 months. The outlines were being filled. The patterns were aligning. Back inside the branch, Alina noticed Preston checking himself in the mirrored surface of a filing cabinet. He adjusted his tie, smoothed his hair, and returned to scrolling through his list of new prospects. Then, at 2:14 p.m., Terrell walked through the doors again. This time, he wore a charcoal overcoat over a tailored suit. His folder remained tucked under one arm, but his posture had subtly shifted, still calm, still quiet, but firmer, heavier with purpose. He did not hesitate. He did not ask to be directed. He walked straight past the reception, past the line of waiting clients, and toward the same counter he had stood at 2 days before. Preston saw him before anyone else and froze for just a breath. A flicker of disbelief flashed across his face before he smoothed it away with a forced smile. "Back again?" he asked, his voice dipped in performative friendliness. "What can we do for you today?" Terrell didn't respond immediately. Instead, he placed a sealed envelope on the desk. It bore no markings, but had a firm weight. He stood silently as Preston looked at it, then back at him. "Are we delivering something?" Preston asked, trying to maintain dominance. Still no answer. Only the calm of a man who understood that the room had turned colder for someone else now. Across the floor, a new employee glanced over, sensing tension but not understanding its source. Alina stood near the printer again, her eyes trained on Terrell. This time, when Preston reached for the envelope, Terrell looked directly at him, meeting his eyes for the first time that day. And in that gaze, there was no rage, no demand, just a surgical precision, the quiet stare of someone who had already moved past emotion. Preston's hands paused. The paper inside the envelope was dense and official, but he didn't open it. He set it aside, then forced another smile. "I'll have to route this through our operations team," he said, trying to reassert control. "Might take a few days, but we'll make sure it's handled." Terrell nodded once, then turned to leave. But before he reached the door, he stopped. Slowly, he looked back, not at the guard, not at the floor, but directly at Preston again. That stare lasted only 2 seconds, but it stripped away everything else in the room. It wasn't angry. The figure was not small, $87 million, scheduled for withdrawal, requested in 3 disbursements. She flagged it for secondary review, assuming it would be manually deferred like most large-scale movements. But before she could report it, a second notification came in, this one from a sister trust, bearing similar authorization codes, timed only 2 minutes apart. Then a third, larger still. At 7:22 a.m., the system stopped auto-routing and initiated a flag-level chain alert to 3 internal departments: asset management, institutional relations, and legal compliance. By 7:31 a.m., the cumulative withdrawal total exceeded $900 million. Executives began arriving early. Coffee cups were abandoned half-finished, briefcases left open on conference tables, as compliance officers huddled around shared monitors displaying transaction trails, all bearing the same client ID embedded in the system: TH Inc. Trust 7A. No one immediately recognized the initials. But when the originating documents were pulled and decrypted, the name at the top of every form, every authorization, every transfer instruction was Terrell Harmon. The silence that followed was sharp, surgical, precise. Not a single person in that boardroom spoke for nearly 10 seconds. Finally, a director of enterprise accounts asked the question that unlocked the storm. Who is he? Legal scrambled to cross-reference all internal databases. Institutional records were triple-checked, signatures verified, contracts matched against corporate control filings. The results cascaded through the hierarchy like a detonation. Terrell Harmon, age 42, was not only the sole beneficiary of a conglomerate of private trusts managed through 5 states, but also the controlling stakeholder of Arden Cove Capital, a silent fund holding 12.4% of Mechlin Financial through a combination of silent stock options, preferred shares, and embedded acquisition rights. Every major decision made at the institutional level within the last 3 years had unknowingly required his passive approval. Every board vote counted his stake. The branch that had dismissed him, just one of over 220 locations partially under his ownership umbrella. The man the staff had flagged as disruptive, who had been escorted out like a trespasser, was the very person whose silent power helped determine quarterly direction. In less than 1 hour, Terrell's request to withdraw $2 billion across 6 trust structures had triggered Mecklen's highest-level financial contingency protocols. Not since the housing crisis had that much capital been ordered to move through the system so quickly. Emails turned into phone calls. Phone calls turned into emergency sessions. The CEO was contacted mid-flight. A special meeting was called at 9 a.m., with half the board attending virtually. They stared at projections on the screen, at institutional graphs rapidly plummeting under the weight of an irreversible withdrawal chain. The question kept surfacing. Why now? Why this account? And when compliance confirmed that all withdrawal orders had been pre-approved weeks in advance and merely scheduled to execute if no contact was initiated by a specific day. Today, the board finally understood. The envelope left on Preston's desk was not a complaint, nor a warning. It was the final signal, an irreversible command embedded in a clock Terrell had set long before he walked through their glass doors. At the branch level, confusion reigned. Preston was pulled into a side room without explanation. His manager, Harold Beckman, was already inside, pale, hands trembling slightly as he reread the internal email marked Priority Tier 0. It included a brief line: all client interactions involving TH Inc. Trust 7A must be forwarded immediately to Office of Corporate Counsel. Do not attempt contact. Do not override protocols. Preston, still recovering from shock, tried to understand. Are we saying he owns part of the company? Harold didn't respond directly. He simply gestured to the memo again. Preston leaned against the wall, his throat dry, a cold sweat beginning to creep along his collar. He was testing us, he whispered. Harold looked at him sharply. He wasn't testing. He was confirming. On the other side of the building, Alina stood frozen at her workstation. Word had already reached her through unofficial whispers. She felt her stomach turn, not from fear, but from recognition. She had known something was off. She had felt it in the way Terrell watched, waited, absorbed. He hadn't walked in hoping for service. He had walked in to finish something. The day unfolded like a slow collapse. Internal press teams were mobilized. Regional managers were placed on emergency calls. Preston was advised to take immediate administrative leave. Harold received notice that his own tenure was under review pending board-level inquiry. Alina was quietly transferred to the communications liaison team for early insights. In a hushed, glass-walled office high above the street, Mecklen's acting general counsel stared at the series of screen captures submitted by Marissa Yates's news team. At 8:02 a.m., a clip no longer than 90 seconds was uploaded to a secure cloud and then mirrored onto a confidential media server. By 8:14 a.m., the video, captured discreetly by Marissa Yates during her visit, had been reviewed, verified, and marked for pre-release by the Sentinel. At 9:03 a.m., the editorial decision was unanimous: go public. By 9:07 a.m., the headline appeared on their homepage and across every major news feed subscribed to their syndicate. It read, "Power in Silence. Billionaire investor ejected from his own bank in racial profiling incident." Underneath the title was the embedded video, showing Terrell Harmon calmly requesting assistance, Preston dismissing him with practiced arrogance, Marcus the security guard escorting him out without basis, and perhaps most damning of all, the dismissive tone and exact phrasing that suggested Terrell was unwelcome due solely to assumptions. By 9:20 a.m., the clip had over 2 million views. By 10 a.m., it had been dissected by financial analysts, civil rights advocates, and public figures across every social platform. Screenshots flooded LinkedIn and Twitter, while mainstream television picked up the story as part of their morning coverage. By noon, Mecklen's brand had been reshaped by something far more brutal than legal exposure. It had become a symbol. Headlines spread faster than statements could be crafted. Legacy news anchors called it a masterclass in institutional blindness. Activists renamed the bank in hashtags. Influencers offered commentary with captions like, "You never know who you're talking down to." One post, featuring a paused frame of Preston's smug expression, simply read, "Meet the reason your bank just lost $2 billion. The virality was instant. Corporate headquarters was overwhelmed. Press teams could not respond fast enough. Damage control plans that had been drawn up in theory were now being tested under the heat of real-time collapse. Meanwhile, further investigation surfaced. Journalists uncovered that Terrell was not just a silent investor. He was also the founder and chairman of the Harmonic Trust Initiative, a shadowed but respected organization that operated under a simple principle: investigate, audit, and restructure financial institutions that exhibited systemic discrimination. The group was known for acquiring stakes in banks, brokerages, and credit networks through complex shell trusts. They collected data quietly, recorded behavior meticulously, and then executed sudden pivots that either changed the firm's internal culture or dismantled it through legal and financial means. Terrell had used his wealth not to build towers, but to test foundations. Mecklin was not his first case, but by far his most public. At 1 p.m., Terrell's team released a single-page statement on his behalf through a verified fund communications channel. It was short, written in sharp prose, and did not include a personal quote. It read, "After documented patterns of exclusionary practice, a complete divestment from Mecklin Financial has been executed. Oversight reports have been delivered to the appropriate regulatory bodies. This action aligns with Harmonic Trust's commitment to economic equity, transparency, and ethical conduct. No further commentary will be provided." The message ended with a seal, the Harmonic Trust insignia, once obscure, now instantly recognizable. Inside Mecklin, the fallout was immediate. Preston was placed on indefinite suspension. Harold Beckman was quietly removed from his post. Marcus, the security guard, received a notice of reassignment pending review. Alina was called into a private meeting by senior leadership, not for discipline, but to ask for her first-hand account. Her voice, once dismissed, was now considered vital. Yet the internal shifts did little to stop the bleeding. By evening, client withdrawals had spiked by 17%. Social pressure mounted. Several corporate partners issued statements suspending their contracts with the institution pending investigation. Shareholders demanded emergency town halls. The CEO, freshly landed from an international trip, addressed the media at 6 p.m. standing behind a podium framed by corporate flags and a wall of flashbulbs. His words were careful. "We acknowledge the incident involving Mr. Harmon and are conducting a full review of our internal processes. What occurred at our central branch does not reflect the values of Mecklin Financial. We are committed to listening, learning, and repairing the trust that has been compromised." But behind the scripted sincerity, the cracks were visible. Marissa Yates, watching the live broadcast from her office, leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. She had not spoken to Terrell directly, nor had she tried. She knew the kind of precision that moved behind his decisions. This wasn't about ego. It wasn't about retribution. It was about systems, those built to elevate the few and exclude the many. Terrell's strategy had not been noise. It had been precision warfare. And now, the institution that once thought him invisible was being restructured by the very silence they misread. That night, the board of directors held a private video session. Clients fled in droves. Competitors seized the opportunity with veiled promotions promising equity and inclusion, and watchdog organizations cited Mecklin's case in newly launched federal inquiries into discriminatory banking practices. Within the corporate structure, names were quietly erased from directories, offices were vacated without ceremony, and inboxes returned automated replies. Yet, amid this chaos, the most unexpected directive arrived not from a regulator or a media outlet, but from Terrell Harmon himself. It did not come through legal counsel or a press agency. It arrived in the form of a single envelope delivered to Mecklin's Human Resources Department, bearing his name, stamped with the seal of Harmonic Trust. Inside was a list, short, unembellished, and final. The first item read, "Do not terminate Preston Mathers." The boardroom where that message was read fell into silence. Preston, now sitting at home under suspension, had fully expected to be dismissed, sued, blacklisted. The world had turned against him. The footage had made him a symbol of elitism and racial ignorance. His inbox was flooded with hate mail, his image caricatured on late-night talk shows, and even former clients sent messages ending their affiliations with him. So when the letter from Terrell was explained to him during a conference call, he could hardly believe what he heard. The second item on the list clarified it further. Mr. Mathers will instead attend a mandatory 12-week program at the Center for Economic Equity and Justice, fully funded by the Harmonic Trust Initiative. The program, housed in a converted university campus just outside Atlanta, was no passive retreat. It was immersive, intensive, and deliberately designed to dismantle the cognitive scaffolding that held up racial bias in high-stakes financial systems. Attendees, often high-level executives, were required to live on-site, engage with marginalized communities, study systemic history, and participate in facilitated dialogues with people directly affected by institutional prejudice. Terrell's condition was simple: no public apology from Preston, no damage control campaign, just a full experience of confronting the lens through which he had viewed men like Terrell, and being forced to rebuild it piece by piece. He doesn't need to lose his job, Terrell had written. He needs to lose the illusion that made him think his job was a shield from consequence. Harold Beckman, the branch manager, did not receive the same offer. He was removed from his position 2 days after the board meeting, his contract terminated with no renewal clause. While his actions had been more passive than Preston's, his refusal to act, to listen, to investigate, had rendered him complicit in the eyes of the institution and the public. Internal communications revealed that multiple reports had crossed Harold's desk before the incident with Terrell. Reports filed by junior employees regarding customer service discrepancies, including several referencing quiet patterns of racial bias. He had dismissed them all. Now he was gone, erased as swiftly as he had once silenced others. Meanwhile, the Harmonic Trust Initiative held its own press briefing, not flashy, not indulgent, but precise. It took place in a neutral venue with no company banners, no corporate branding, and no podium. Terrell stood in front of a semicircle of reporters and gave a single prepared statement. "What happened at Mecklin Financial is not unique," he said. "It is merely visible. What matters now is not that the mask slipped, but that it can no longer be used. We do not seek apologies. We seek systems rebuilt by those who once benefited from their imbalance. If there is to be change, it must be made not by those on the margins screaming for entry, but by those inside recognizing the walls they helped maintain." No questions were taken. No follow-up was offered. He left the room as quietly as he had arrived, his voice lingering in the air longer than his shadow. In the weeks that followed, the public's attention turned toward Preston's journey through the Equity Center. Though no media was allowed inside, anonymous reports began surfacing, accounts of Preston participating in open circles, speaking to formerly incarcerated entrepreneurs, learning from immigrant families who had been denied loans, engaging in dialogues where he was not the authority, but the student. At first, the reports painted a picture of discomfort and resistance, but gradually they shifted. A facilitator was quoted anonymously saying, "He didn't come here to redeem his image. He came here because, for the first time, he had nothing left to defend." Mecklin Financial, reeling from withdrawals and media scrutiny, restructured 5 departments, merged 3 regional branches, and hired an external consultancy to review all internal training. Their diversity report was reissued, this time with unfiltered metrics. The damage was immense. 12 months after the collapse of Mecklin's public reputation and the unprecedented withdrawal of capital that left a permanent scar across the industry's conscience, the world had changed, but not in the dramatic, fleeting way of headlines and scandals. It changed slowly, brick by brick, conversation by uncomfortable conversation, and no transformation embodied that shift more than the man who once represented everything that was wrong within it. Preston Mathers, who had once dismissed a quietly powerful man at a bank counter as unworthy of attention, now stood beneath a modest banner that read equity in practice, not behind a desk of marble, but on the floor of a converted community center in Charlotte. The event was part of a nationwide initiative led by the Harmonic Trust in partnership with grassroots organizations, designed not for media attention or rebranding, but to rebuild understanding between institutions and the communities they claim to serve. Preston had arrived early that morning, not as a guest or speaker, but as a worker. He helped set up chairs, carried in bottled water, organized welcome packets for attendees from underserved neighborhoods, minority-owned small business owners, young adults seeking financial literacy. He didn't wear a suit. He wore a plain navy shirt with a fabric badge that read Program Coordinator. Most of the attendees didn't recognize him, and that was how he preferred it. But some did. A few had seen his face a year before on national television, remembered the freeze frame of him scoffing at a man in silence. They watched him now from a distance, curious, cautious. They didn't approach, not yet. At noon, the main speaker arrived. Terrell Harmon entered without entourage, without cameras, just a messenger bag slung over his shoulder and a calm nod to the volunteers. He greeted each by name, including Preston, who stood a moment longer than necessary when Terrell extended his hand. Their handshake was firm but untheatrical. No words were exchanged, and none were needed. Terrell moved to the front of the room and took the mic, offering only a brief welcome, then immediately turned it over to the panel. The session was structured not as a lecture, but as a shared discussion. Topics ranged from loan access and digital banking inclusion to unconscious bias in portfolio advising. Preston sat quietly for most of it, taking notes, passing microphones, adjusting slides. But near the end of the day, one of the organizers nudged him gently and whispered, "He wants you to close." Preston blinked, unsure if he heard correctly. He asked. The nod was firm. Terrell remained seated near the back, his expression unreadable, but his attention fixed. Preston stood slowly and walked to the front. He took the microphone with both hands. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't adjust his posture. He began speaking like a man who had rehearsed nothing but lived every word. A year ago, he said, I thought I understood how the world worked. I had the education, the job title, the numbers on paper that told me I was doing things right. I thought fairness was measured by formulas and that people who struggled just hadn't figured out the rules yet. I thought the systems we worked within were neutral. I thought I was neutral. He paused. No one interrupted. And then I met someone who didn't raise his voice, didn't challenge me, didn't fight. He just watched. And in that silence, I heard everything I had ignored for years. He didn't say Terrell's name, but every person in the room knew. I didn't lose my job, he continued. I lost something more dangerous. I lost a part of myself that believed I couldn't be wrong. There was no applause yet, no nods of validation, just a stillness, respectful and raw. The last 12 months have been the most difficult of my life, not because I was punished, but because I was re-educated. I sat in rooms where I wasn't in control. I listened to stories that didn't end with my opinion. I learned from people I once pretended to advise. And every time I wanted to defend myself, I remembered that defense was how I had survived discomfort, not how I had earned growth. He looked across the room, not searching for approval, but offering accountability. I stand here today not to ask for forgiveness, but to show that transformation is possible. Not perfect, not finished, but possible. A long pause followed. Then Terrell stood. He walked slowly to the front and stood beside Preston. He didn't take the microphone. He simply placed a hand on Preston's shoulder and nodded once. That gesture, more than words, told the room what they needed to hear. Later that evening, as the last guests left and the lights dimmed, Preston remained behind to collect used name tags, straighten chairs, pack leftover materials. Terrell watched him for a moment from the door, then quietly exited. Outside, the air was crisp, and a faint breeze carried the scent of something beginning again. Inside, Preston placed the last name tag in a box, closed it, and sat alone in the silence. Not as a banker, not as a man trying to fix his image, but as someone finally willing to rebuild the world he once misunderstood from the floor up. The end. Before you go, let's hear your thoughts. What moment in this story caught you off guard the most? Do you think Preston truly changed, or was it just redemption on the surface? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location and opinions in the comments. If stories like this make you think, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Your support helps these stories keep reaching the people who need to hear them.